So we'll do a little more of this. Security documentation. You have policies, and then you have procedures that specify how to do things, like install the OS, and then standards, and then guidelines and baselines, which measure your level of security. And so there they are, the various components. So policies are a strategic plan, an overall plan, defining acceptable risk levels and so on, and this is there to show that senior management has exercised due care. So you got policies up here, then you got policies at different levels, organizational, system specific, or issue specific, and then other categories like regulatory, advisory, and informative. And so there they are. It's kind of obvious, issue specific and system specific. Regulatory are compliance with regulations. Advisories are recommendations, not mandatory, which is the most common situation. And there's informative policies, having even a lower level of enforcement. And then processes, step by step to do things. These are your procedurals. If you watch cop shows, they're mostly police procedurals, showing the steps the police go through to respond to a crime. And you have security procedures specifying exactly step by step how to do things like harden an endpoint device, install a firewall, and so on. And standards. These are requirements to make sure people use the same software. Most companies force you all to use the same products on every laptop, usually the Microsoft-only products on a Microsoft operating system, so it's easy to control with a domain controller. And then guidelines are recommendations how to meet those standards. And baselines measure the current state of some aspect of your security so you can compare it to a time in the future or the time after you change something and decide if the change is improving things. Oh, this is a good idea, a tip about canceling ad requests. This is good. Other students are often the best resource for help to figure out how to navigate the online system. Let's take a look at a Kahoot. 1F. All right. Still more. I'll give it a few more seconds. I see a message. Perhaps somebody is telling me who they are. Somebody's doing an ad. Okay, good. Another 129S. I'll check those after these Kahoots. All right. Okay, step-by-step instructions. Where are they? That's a procedure. All right. All right, what's the most common type of policy? Advisory is the most common. These others, most of them are in fact advisory. All right, what policy enforces compliance with industry or legal standards? All right, and that's regulatory. What? Oh, that's a mistake. Regulatory is the right answer, but you didn't get your points. I'm going to make a note. I have to fix that Kahoot. That's messed up. This is 1E, I think. When you just make a note, that's rude. 1F. 1F has a bad answer. Well, that happens sometimes. That's part of why these things are extra credit. All right. How rude. Sorry about that. Anyway, some people win anyway, but wasn't as fair as it should have been. And Reezy will have to tell me who they are if they want their points. But the other two are real names, so those people will get their points for sure. All right. Anyway, I think we can do one more. It's not 7:30 yet, so I think that'll be good. We won't have so much to do next time. So, business continuity is helping your company continue to operate even when a disaster of some kind happens. So this is a long-term plan, and this is an umbrella plan. There are many smaller plans inside it, like the disaster recovery plan, which is planned to deal with the specific disruption, like a malware infection. And it's to deal with the immediate consequences of that disaster, typically by moving operations to an alternate location. The business impact analysis is part of this, where you determine how long you could live without certain parts of the company. And therefore you know which parts of it you must bring back up quickly and which parts you can take some more time to bring back. So you develop contingency planning, business impact analysis, you identify controls, create contingency strategies of how you're going to deal with these disasters, and then you test your plans, train people, and have exercises to make sure they're ready to do it. And then you have to have planned maintenance because, of course, things change, and you have to make sure that your plan is updated to reflect the current situation. Who is typically responsible for developing the BCP? Well, it would be somewhere in the management, and I would think it would be the chief security officer who would then specify a board to develop this plan and would put on it whoever they chose. I'm not sure it's in this course, but I think it might be in the CISSP course. They talk about composing the team that does this. Anyway, so you got a lot of personnel security procedures, which have to do with hiring and such, screening candidates, checking backgrounds and such, and then non-disclosure agreements, code of conduct, and so on. Yeah, cross-functional from the clients I've seen. Yeah, your plan involves input from a lot of different business sectors. And you may have conflict of interest and ethics policies too. So when you onboard people, you have to give them an orientation and provision them with a laptop and access to servers and such. And when they leave, you have to make sure that you've transferred their knowledge to their replacement so you can continue, and have an exit interview where you make sure they understand their obligations and so on. Now, I knew a guy that worked at a major company, and he would search people to see if they were trying to sneak confidential secrets out of the company, and he said he never failed to find it. Everybody tried to sneak off proprietary data. So job rotation is where you move people from one job to another. This helps prevent one person from becoming irreplaceable. If you have one person who is the only person that can do something, that's dangerous because they might be doing something bad, like siphoning off some of the money, and you would never know. Rotating other people in makes sure that what's going on in that job is really what should be going on. Separation of duties is where you do not let one person do a critical thing alone. They must get a approval from a second person who checks it and makes sure it's right. So one person can't do something too dangerous. That way there can't be fraud with just one bad person. Two people would have to conspire together to commit fraud. Yeah, watch out for people who never take vacations. It's the same issue, yeah. They never take vacation, they never want to move their job, then that means nobody ever really gets to check and see what they're doing, and it's possible that they're doing something bad. So here's some risk management. So you have, you often start by determining your assets, and then there are exposures, which might, and you can have safeguards. Threat agents are people who attack you. Threats are bad things that might happen. Vulnerabilities are weaknesses, which might let the threat actually take effect. And that risks is a measure of how much you expect to lose. So there's just a lot of steps there in a cycle to measure how important your assets are, what bad things might happen to them, and what countermeasures you can exercise to lower those risks. So risk assessment, you have assets, figuring out what your valuable things are. A threat is something bad that might happen. A vulnerability is a weakness that exposes you to damage from a threat. So risk is threat times vulnerability. For example, the risk of earthquakes is the same in Boston and San Francisco. In Boston, there are not very many earthquakes, but the buildings are not built to withstand earthquakes, so they do more harm. In San Francisco, we have earthquakes frequently, but the buildings are designed to withstand earthquakes. So the net result is the risk is about the same. Impact is the severity of the damage. Threat times vulnerability times impact. And of course, most of us would say having human life, getting people killed would be considered a near infinite impact. Only the military is allowed to plan for acceptable human losses. Private businesses don't normally regard any amount of people dying because of your decisions as an acceptable loss. So you can have a matrix where you have high, medium, and low, and you determine, if something is likely to happen or almost certain to happen, but insignificant, then that's highly likely to happen. Anyway, there's you can make a matrix and qualitatively rate things. And you can also do it quantitatively. You take the asset value, how much it costs to have the thing. Yeah, I wonder, I think E is extreme and high, medium, and low. I think that's what it is. That's what it looks like, because if you're almost certain to have something happen and it would have a lot of damage, then that's extreme. That's likely to end your business. So I think that's the point. These are the most dangerous ones. Yeah. Extreme, high, medium, and low is what it looks like to me. So if you multiply the asset value times the exposure factor, that is the cost of one bad event. So if you have an asset and the threat you're considering would completely destroy it, then the exposure factor is 100%, and if that bad thing happens, you lose the entire value of the asset. Then you determine annual rate of occurrence, how many of those will happen per year, and so if you multiply the single loss expectancy times the annual rate of occurrence, that's the total amount of dollars you're going to lose in a year. And that's what you want, because now you can compare that to the cost of a countermeasure. And say, if we're losing $10,000 a year, but the countermeasure costs $100,000, it's probably not worth getting that countermeasure. So there's another way to look at it is total cost of ownership. If you include a safeguard, you're going to have to pay for the safeguard, whatever it is, like guards or locks or something, and then you're going to have staff and maintenance fees and subscriptions. You figure out the total cost per year of implementing that safeguard. And so now you can calculate return on investment. How much money would you save? Well, if the total cost of ownership of the safeguard is less than the annualized loss expectancy, then you should have a return on investment. Investing in that safeguard would be a wise move. If these numbers are all accurate, which, by the way, they usually aren't. Anyway, so now you can, once you've got a risk, you can now make a choice. These are the 4 basic risk treatments. You can accept the risk, just do nothing and let it happen because preventing it would cost more than accepting it. You can mitigate it, putting in some kind of control to lower the risk. You can get insurance or outsource it, so you transfer that risk to somebody else, make it somebody else's problem. Or you can avoid the risk by changing your business process so you no longer do the activity that would lead to this threat. Does the CISSP require knowledge of discount rate and present value of money? No, that's economics, and the CISSP does not cover that kind of economics. This is about the only financial stuff in the CISSP, is just calculating the annualized loss expectancy from an asset value. This is about the only math in the CISSP, if you want to even call it that. So quantitative risk analysis would boil things down to dollars. Qualitative would just put it in categories like high, medium, and low. So here's the NIST management framework. You categorize your systems, you select security controls, you implement them, then you assess the controls to see how well they work, and then you authorize and monitor them, and then you can decide to go around the loop again. From my experience, how many companies actually quantify risk? I haven't worked at the level of management that actually does this. Richard Wu would probably know, another teacher at City College. But I think most estimates of financial consequences are very vague. For example, everybody always has a spreadsheet claiming that the return on investment is going to be high, but then it isn't. I think most people with experience take all projections with a big grain of salt. And these are all projections, Insurance companies is a very good point. Insurance companies are, I think, the only people that actually do these kind of calculations with precision. And one thing they're doing now is they're selling cyber risk insurance, and I do not think they can predict what the actual amount of cyber loss is going to be, especially in this world of ransomware. So I think that's a real speculative business. These are very good questions, and I'm glad you folks are contributing help with the answers. So then there's control categories. This is security plus level stuff. There's preventive controls that prevent a bad thing from happening. Detective controls detect a bad thing without preventing it.
Sorry, could you say that again? Sorry, I'm having trouble here.
Somehow my watch keeps turning on some stupid voice control garbage. Anyway, then there's corrective controls that undo the damage caused by an incident. And recovery controls. These two are hard to tell apart. I think the next slide might help. And deterrent controls try to scare away an attacker with, yes, I assume something I'm saying is triggering some kind of stupid attempt to help me. I got to find some way to turn off the stupid voice-controlled garbage on my iWatch here. Anyway, then compensating controls make up for a weakness in another control. And corrective and recovery, I always have trouble remembering the difference. It'll come up corrective, corrects a damaged system, and recovery restores functionality after a security incident. Those two seem essentially identical to me. If there's a difference, it seems too subtle to remember. Anyway, so that's it. Preventive, detective, corrective, and recovery. Then deterrent is like signs to scare people away, and compensating controls are a control to compensate for weakness in another control. Like you can have an administrative control where you review the server logs to detect violations of the policy. And this is, by the way, very common. But if you do something like run a vulnerability scanner on a server, it will report that there's like a SQL injection. But when you actually try to exploit that SQL injection in a penetration test, you will discover that there is another control behind it that in fact means you can't do much harm. All right. And so administrative controls are policies, procedures, or regulations, just something in the management. Technical controls are technology like antivirus and firewalls, things like that. And physical controls are locks, security guards, dogs. Yeah, corrective removes malware. Recovery unencrypt documents from malware. I guess if you can understand the difference, you're doing better than me. All right. And then there's threat modeling. So you can do it by starting from an application and deciding what kind of attacks might come in, or from an asset and look at what kind of attacks would come in. Or you can start from the attacker and do models of who the attackers are and what their motivations are and what their known tactics and procedures are. And any of those will try to model what kind of threats are coming in. This is a growing field. A lot of people like to do threat modeling and then attack simulation, where you have software that simulates an advanced resistant threat attacker coming in. All right, and here's the stride threat categorization, which people use a lot in industry. Microsoft had these types of attacks: spoofing, where you pretend to be somebody you aren't; tampering with things; repudiation, where you deny an action that took place by doing things like erasing logs; information disclosure; denial of service; and elevation of privilege from, say, a user up to administrator. Those are categories of things threat actors might do. And there are other similar tools, PASTA, Trike, and VAST, that also try to sort the types of threats into categories to help organize your planning. And so here's Stride, PASTA, Trike, and VAST. And these other ones seem to have more features like encouraging collaboration among stakeholders and such, and automating the process. And so then there's supply chain risks, which are a big deal. This has hit us quite a bit. This is what happened in the Colonial Oil Pipeline attack, and in another one that happened recently where they took over some management platform that was used by many companies. So you use a product, but that product depends on other products, and somewhere in the supply chain, somebody inserts malware. SolarWinds was the big one, yeah. So people are trying to address this now by requiring a software bill of materials that lists all the dependencies and tracking it back. So a lot of people are aware of this. Yeah, there's the Microsoft Threat Modeling tool. Yeah, I've used that. And again, you don't have to use it for the CISSP, but on the real job, you totally use it. All right, and let's take a look at 1G. And that's the end of this chapter. Got a little further than I thought we would, which is fine. That's here. All right, and most of the lectures will not be this long. Try to end by 7 or 7:30. Yeah, Log4j, is that a supply chain attack? I'm not sure if it's a supply chain attack, but it's certainly an important vulnerability. I think it did turn into effectively a supply chain attack, because it turned out a lot of other products were in fact using Log4j that people didn't realize, yeah. Good. All right. Maybe that's all we're going to have. All right. So a warning sign. What's that? It's deterrent. Good. All right. How about an electrified fence? That's preventive. All right. All right, how about a security camera? That's technical. It's technology. It's also detective, but it's a technical control. It's not a physical control. It doesn't actually prevent you entering a room. Right. Well, you could see something physical there. Anyway, how about an acceptable use policy? All right, that's administrative. And by the way, the security camera is technical because it uses technology. I said it wouldn't prevent you entering a room, but that's another issue. It would detect you entering a room, but it's using technology. That's why it's technical. And this is administrative, of course, because it's a administrative bureaucratic rule. It's not technical or physical. If a risk has a high likelihood and a low impact, what treatment is best? All right, you accept that. If something is likely to happen and it doesn't cause much harm, then you just let it happen. An electric fence, well, I don't think you'd call the electricity and electric fence really tech. I mean, it's using electricity, but it's not really technical like a computer or a camera. But, of course, none of these categories are 100% clear. You could make some argument for another one, but I think the best match is physical for an electric fence. This, by the way, is very much the case of the CISSP. You have to choose the best among answers, and it's often not 100% clear. Between avoid and accept, avoid means modify your business process so you no longer have that risk. Like you just quit doing something so that it can never happen. That is the most extreme. Like risk avoidance is the most extreme risk treatment where you actually stop doing things. Like, for example, if you're worried about having a lawsuit in another nation, that you could withdraw from that nation and no longer do business there, and then that risk would vanish. That's avoidance. Very much the opposite of acceptance, where you make a significant change in your business just to make that risk go away. Yep. All right. So we have 100 cars worth $50K each, and employees wreck 1% of them each year. So what is the annualized loss expectancy? Okay, if employees wreck 1% of them, then you're going to lose one of those 100 cars per year, so you're going to lose $50K per year just for the car. Now, not addressed here, of course, is the damage to the people, which would probably be a lot larger. But anyway, if you're only considering the cars, you expect to lose $50K a year from this. And so now you might consider things like buying more insurance on the cars, buying better safety equipment on the cars, or anti-lock brakes or something, training your employees to drive cars better, or in the case of avoidance, you could stop giving them company cars entirely and make them take the bus. And that would be avoiding this risk. All right. Anyway. All right, let's see. Reezy has won twice, but I don't know who that person is. How many of you has won twice? And S squared, I know who that is, has also won twice. All right. So I've recorded the winners. I'll stop